that now, the fact that they appear to have turned the White House comms department into, or comms office into a rapid response group that will get eyeballs. And you think about that simply horrific, I'm sorry, that was characterizing it, that video they put out of their plans for Gaza, or the video that they did of the men who were rendered to El Salvador. That came from our White House, and it got the kind of frustrated and angry or celebratory responses that they wanted. It got eyeballs. So he has managed to use that attention to the press very effectively. Now, one of the things that's done, the whole idea of the lying press and of the idea that it's fake news, they're not telling you things, is it has managed to discredit the American government and the institutions of American society, which is, of course, a key plan of Project 2025, to get rid of all the pillars of American society, business, education, the press, the government, and so on, so that they can start again with a theocracy. So that has managed to weaken, I think, people's associations of trust with the media and with government. But we are also in a moment that is very different in my mind from 2016, when we didn't really have any opportunity to go elsewhere for information. Now that's a bit of a broad brush, but if you think about what's happened since the coronavirus pandemic and the use of so many people turning to the use of Zoom and social media, we've gotten the rise of a whole new independent press. And that independent press is problematic, I think you would say, from the fact it doesn't give us a shared base of knowledge, but it does give us a lot of information that we couldn't have had before. And the place I want to point here, there's so many great independent people, but this is not an independent group. Who knows what is central to that book? And people who don't have information make really bad decisions in that. Now, obviously, the framers were not reading Jane Austen. They weren't reading Shakespeare. They weren't reading Jane Austen. But the idea of a democracy depends on people being able to evaluate their own interests. And in order to do that, they have to have accurate information. So if you are trying to get people in a democracy to make bad decisions, that is to vote away the rights and the privileges that you have or the policies that you like, it's important to make sure they don't have good information. And you can see this reflected not only in the rise of talk radio in the 1980s and the Fox News Channel in the 1990s. One of the things I always like to point to is the fact that when Alex Jones starts InfoWars, the tagline of it is, "There's a war on for your mind." And we have seen that, and we have seen the ways in which usually an authoritarian government will try and stamp down good information. We'll try and stamp it out. We'll harass journalists and so on. But what we've really seen in the in the Soviet republics, former Soviet republics, since the 1990s and early aughts, is a new kind of disinformation. And I think we see it here in the United States as well, which is instead of trying to silence journalists in the really violent ways that we could go into, they simply flood the zone with so much information that nobody has any idea what's real and what's not, and as a result start to make decisions based on a virtual reality. Because again, there is this idea that if you are going to have control over your country, your democracy, but also over your own life, you need good information. And my brother is a teacher, and he always says, people are wired to learn. Human beings are wired to learn, or we would have gotten eaten by saber-toothed tigers because we didn't know what was rustling in the bushes. But the question is, what are people going to learn? And one of the things that jumps out to me in this moment are the number of people who didn't pay attention to democracy. They didn't pay attention to the way our country worked because it all seemed fine. And now they recognize that democracy is not a spectator sport. We are watching these men rendered to El Salvador. We're watching the attacks on individuals. We're watching the attacks on the press. We're watching the attacks on universities. And people are like, wait, you can't do that. And one of the stories I saw this morning that fascinated me was the fact that the book publishers, are madly reprinting the Constitution and the documents because people are like, I gotta read that stuff.